All right, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to All Saints Church here in Pasadena. My name is Thomas Diaz. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm on staff as your Director of Connection and Care. Continued happy Pride Month. The celebrations continue, and as we come to really the end of Pride Month, the movement continues. And that is part of really what we're trying to build here at All Saints Church, that it's just not a month that we come together and put the rainbow flags up and celebrate. It is the movement that we're committing ourselves to. So thank you for joining us for this really special Sunday forum on the subject of visibility among faith communities. And I'm honored to have two esteemed guests with us. I'm going to have them now introduce themselves. So Ani, if you want to go first.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ani Zonneveld. I'm the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. And in the context of LGBT rights, I've been at the forefront within the Muslim community since 2006 when Prop 8 came about. And so I've been almost the go-to faith community leader when it comes to LGBTQ rights in the context of Islam.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you. Hannah.
And yeah, I'm Hannah Earnshaw. My pronouns are they, them. I'm here at All Saints Church on the vestry, and I've helped the LGBTQ ministry here for the past few years. So hopefully if you're regular here, you've seen me around. But I came to All Saints about 5.5 years ago looking for a faith community that would accept LGBTQ people. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And special wave to those joining us online and streaming. Good to be with you all. So we're going to go ahead and get started and really start opening up the discussion about, visibility among all faith communities. And so I'm asking, the first question I have really for the three of us to respond to is, how would you respond to what is visibility among faith communities? How do you see it? How would you define visibility? And what is there for us that we need to challenge among our faith communities? And I'll have either one of you start on that.
Sure. I guess for me, visibility, LGBTQ visibility in faith communities is all about seeing an example that you can follow. For example, for me, while I knew that LGBTQ people existed, were out there and had even met some, by the time that I went to university, it was only at that time when I actually met someone who was both gay and a Christian that I realized that that was even an option. For a lot of people growing up in more conservative religious traditions, or just religious traditions where LGBTQ things just don't get talked about, you end up thinking that the two are kind of mutually exclusive, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And so I didn't really think about my own sexuality and my own gender identity until I'd seen an example of someone who was both queer and Christian and held both of these things important to them. And I was like, oh, that was an option. And so for me, visibility within a faith community is having those examples of people visible. You can see them and go, oh, actually now that I know that that's a possibility, I can start thinking about these things for myself. And I'm not a gay man like that one individual was, but it opened the door for me to think about sexuality. And then I met a trans person who was also a Christian and went, oh, that's a possibility. And that allowed me to then think about that for myself and to then reach my own understanding of my identity. But just seeing those examples and going, oh, that's actually a path that exists. I think is an important thing.
So I'm originally from Malaysia, and for the longest time in my memory, early memories, is being trans was quite openly accepted in Malaysia, which is a Muslim majority country. Now that was back then, but that's not the case now. Trans people are very much vilified in the name of religion. I also, when we're talking about visibility here, but I also had an uncle who lived with us, and we traveled all over the world, And I just want to share a personal story because we can get into this political and theological climate that we have right now. But just to give the context from where I'm coming from is my uncle was our chef and we lived all over the place. My father was ambassador. We lived in 3 different countries. And my uncle was my mother's oldest brother. And he was one that cooked and provided for us. And he was also the one that taught me how to dance, the traditional cultural Malaysian dances. And I always thought he was a bit feminine. And of course, many decades later, like literally maybe about 8 years ago, I asked my oldest brother, because now that I'm very much imbued in theology and advancing LGBTQ rights, I asked my brother, hey, was Uncle so-and-so gay? And he just basically cracked, smiled. And yeah, of course he was gay. And unfortunately, I never had the chance to say thank you to my uncle. He's passed on a long time ago. And so I think that I just owe it to him for me to support him and his his community when obviously he was silenced even within our community. It was more of like don't ask, don't tell kind of environment. So that's kind of like the visibility that I've seen growing up. And my parents never spoke ill of homosexuality at all. When it comes to the visibility, I've been very visible when it comes as an ally in regards to LGBTQ rights, and it's been very, very challenging. But it's also very rewarding to know that the majority of American Muslims do support LGBTQ rights. And like your experience, I think the traditional teaching still in the mosque is that you cannot be gay and Muslim. And what we've done is we've negated that whole framework as actually un-Islamic, and we've gone to the historical context, we've gone to the theology to basically debunk that framework. I can delve deeper into that, but I think being visible as a person of faith, as a lay community, and to counter the homophobic teachings and sentiments of the dominant narrative in American Muslim communities is actually really, really important. And there was actually a position statement signed on by over 150 American and Canadian Muslim religious leaders, mostly Americans, really taking a hard line on against LGBTQ rights. And so now more than ever is it important for people of faith within the Muslim community to speak up.
No, thank you to the both of you for that, for your responses. And I would say that too. I was born and raised in the Roman Catholic setting, and I was very fortunate enough to be in a family environment that was very open, and my parents instilled curiosity with me and my sibling, and I think that helped for me, once I was kind of in the middle school age, to say, okay, yeah, there's something different about me. I didn't have language for it, but I knew that I could be curious about it. The part for me that always felt, pressure to not be able to be my full self was when I was in a church setting. And we like to say, as a kid, I always knew that God loved me. It wasn't until I got more deeper into the church setting that at least in the Roman Catholic setting per se, that I started to get afraid of being who I was. And more as the years gone by, I just thought, okay, there's something wrong with me then if this is what I'm hearing. And yet when we see throughout Scripture, one of my best biblical characters, and there's a list of them, but think about throughout Scripture and how there are folks who are trying to make themselves visible among different communities, right? We see it all through Scripture. So there is something there thousands of years now later, and we're still saying, okay, we're still not fully integrated as the people of God, right? It's still not there. So given your personal experiences among your faith communities and things that you've experienced in the past, what would you say why is that still a challenge? What are we seeing today, and what is still enforcing that in order to truly be embraced and loved in a particular community or faith community, it seems like we still have to take something away or apart from you in order to love you. And this morning at 7:30, I preached on I like to say, the gospel of bell hooks. And one of my favorite lines from her is talking about that redemptive love. That redemptive love is, I don't need to take anything away from you in order for me to love you, right? But we know that's not the case in many of our faith communities, especially here in the States. So how would you define that challenge? And what are you seeing just from your own perspectives of what we're seeing among different faith communities?
So it's really interesting how challenging it is. I go back to the theology and the crux of how we were created in the womb, and that is, regardless of faith or no faith, or what sexuality you end up becoming, at the end of the day, there's a point within the womb, and this is in the Quran, where God blows the Spirit of God into the womb. And so regardless of what you end up becoming, in the biology of it, you all are God's creation. I mean, that is like fundamental to Islam and to all faith traditions. And yet it is so difficult for those imbued in patriarchy, the patriarchal interpretation of religion, for them to overcome that fundamental rights of all human beings. And so I've been asked to actually do a workshop in bringing those that are sitting on the fence and those that are really homosexuals to bring that to dive into this identity crisis, the conflicting between what the Quran states and what you believe. And how did you come to that belief? And how do we unwire that and rewire that individual? And that has to come through a really difficult conversation. It cannot be like, well, this is what the Quran says, and therefore you're wrong and you're condemned, because that's how they approach it, right? And so we have to really, and this is actually really difficult, to be compassionate to those that you disagree with or those that disagree with you. But if we want to bring the community along, if we want to bring people along, you have to approach them and on all sides with love and compassion, to come at them from where they are, and then to really bring out the reasons for this insecurity and the reasons for why they believe what they believe. And it's very challenging to be kind and loving and compassionate to those who hate. So I just want to start by putting that out there.
Thank you. I think one of the big challenges, and it's something that you touched on that I kind of recognize in my own life as well, is that a lot of the time, even if people are sort of generally supportive of LGBT people, the idea of gay people, the idea of trans people, in a lot of those situations, it just doesn't get talked about. It just doesn't come up in conversation. And so when someone is thinking about and questioning these things, and they're looking or sort of listening for, okay, what are other people saying about this topic? They're going to hear the loudest voices, which are often, the ones with, conservative teachings. So the ones who are teaching about sex and sexuality are the ones who are saying very loudly, no, this is the wrong way to do sex. This is, there's only one right way, and it's this very narrow path and everything else. And a lot of thankfully at this church, we don't keep it quiet either in terms of like our own teaching about what is okay. But I think a lot of the time, just a lot of places which would otherwise be supportive are just quiet. And I think maybe finding some way to become more comfortable as a culture talking about sex and sexuality and relationships in a way that allows for these conversations to come up and allows people to talk about, the different kinds of relationships to each other, to ourselves and our own gender and sexuality. And the more that's out in the open and discussed, the more the people who are supportive and just don't really talk about it can add their voices into the conversation. We realize it's not just this very vocal minority of people who have this very rigid, prescriptive way of thinking about things. They're not actually the only voices out there. Sometimes it can feel that way.
Yeah.
If I can add something, I think it is really important to be visible as allies and as LGBT people. When we, for Pride Month, our various chapters in the United States have been participating in Pride marches, and there's one in New York today, and so our MPV New York is actually actively participating in the march. And then we've had, folks outside of our community, a mother messaging us, my daughter's gone through her journey, and I'm a hijabi, scarf-wearing mother, and I want to be supportive of her. I'm going to join your march, So I think that by being visible and really being at the forefront on this issue over the years, we've seen that more and more people have come out because they feel safe that, there are people, other Muslims, that are actually sharing the same values as I do, values that I've been very afraid to express, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to tag on, Hannah, what you mentioned, and maybe we can elaborate a little bit more, the three of us, but how do we get society more comfortable with these discussions, right? And I think it goes beyond just faith communities. This is also what's happening throughout the secular setting, too. And I'm thinking, I think the Pride Month in itself has now become, right, this new kind of corporate way for corporations to be like, look, we're an ally. We're going to put our rainbow, when we hear now there's over 150 Starbucks going on strike because there are certain areas in the States that folks don't want to see that in their Starbucks. Okay, whatever. But we know that folks are not comfortable with it, right? Just the other day, I'm not kidding. I was driving on the highway, and I was trying to take a picture, but, driving is, safety first. But I wish I could have captured it because it was a car that had a flag, a huge flag, that said straight pride. I thought, okay, I wish I could pull this person over and be like, what's going on here? What are you trying to signal by it, right? Because I feel that at that point, this is just, and talk about compassion and kindness. At first, I was like, okay, this person here needs to sit down and calm down here, take that flag down. But then I thought, no, there's something that this person's trying to say out loud, right? And I think that often becomes the placeholder for folks who are like, no, end of discussion, I don't want to talk about it. But we do. That's how progress is made. And I'm going to go back to Bell Hooks' that line of redemptive love is, I don't need to take anything away from you in order to love you. But it has to be reciprocal at the same time, right? So how do we get more comfortable with these discussions and saying, no, we're not going anywhere? Especially the other phrase going out there, you can't kill queer joy. Right?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm British, so I really don't have a good answer to how we're comfortable talking about these things. But I think there's a missed opportunity for straight people and cisgender people and people who do not consider themselves queer in any way to benefit from examining sexuality and gender. There's a little kind of joke amongst the queer community about the concept of cis plus, which is when a cisgender person has sat down and thought about their gender, really examined it, and decide, okay, how do I feel about this? What does society say I should be with my gender? You know, how do I express my gender? What do I like? What do I not like about this? And like, I've come to all this thinking, examining, and decided, you know what? I am still the gender I was assigned at birth. Like, I'm not trans. I'm not trying to change anything, but I'm now doing it deliberately. And there's just a lot of benefit from having that examination, having those conversations, and I guess trying to get to a place where everyone can have that kind of exploration of themselves in an environment without shame. And I think that's the real sticking point in that around sex and gender and all these things, there's just this, there's still this huge social taboo in that we don't talk about this in most contexts, and also we don't talk about where we, as people, deviate from this kind of mythical norm of what a relationship looks like, what sexuality looks like. I mean, even straight relationships often don't match this kind of perfect standard of, you know, this is exactly how, like, hey, marriage between a man and a woman is supposed to work. And a lot of people look at this mythical ideal and go, our relationship looks like, and we're as normal as they come. Like, and, you know, like, if straight people can't live up to that, then what are queer people supposed to do? So trying to just dismantle this myth of this one standard way a relationship looks, the one way to be a man, the one way to be a woman, just breaking that down and allowing for freedom within that will liberate everyone, straight people included.
Yeah, religion has been promoting this hyper binary masculinity for centuries, right? So we have a lot of work to undo that hyper masculinity. And the way we've been doing it is to talk about the equal rights egalitarian faith interpretation of Islam. That's one way. But how to get people comfortable even to accept this, the non-binary way of looking at the world and the non-binary roles that we play in our respective lives that are so different for each individual. So one thing that we've been doing is this positive masculinity sort of work. And I think that is one way of really opening up young boys, teenagers, to looking at their masculinity in a different way. And that's a starting point for very conservative Muslim societies. And that's kind of like the work that we do. But we also include girls and teenage girls in that conversation too, because then the young women will know, oh, I want to have a man, a partner who's going to be egalitarian, who's going to be positive masculinity, not this hyper toxic, patriarchy version of a man. And so it's important for girls and boys to be in the same space to learn what positive masculinity is. And I think for conservative Muslims, that's the starting point, but it's so far still from the acceptance and normalization of non-binary people. And but I think that is cracking the door open to being inclusive. And I think that's the way forward for conservative Muslim societies.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking on the lines of egalitarian, part how we build that, and another way to look at, the beloved community of all people, is we have to turn to inspiration and knowledge, which we call books. And we know that there is a movement to prevent that. How can we, as folks who are willing to be, out and proud and loud and really just be the actual visible light to society, what do we need to do to ensure, especially for the younger generation, that just because book bans and school boards are going through their thing does not take away who they are as individuals. These are just things that they're trying to be preventive for them to not be able to come into this Allegorian beloved community, experience for themselves, depending on which geographic location they're at, society. But what do we need to do as we're kind of up against this very tough wall of trying to hinder any knowledge and inspiration, but especially for the younger generation?
So two things. What I've done in collaboration with an early childhood expert, development expert friend of mine, is we've actually developed an inclusive Islam curriculum rooted in human rights. So, and this is, so the books that we use are, exemplify, diverse families, same-sex parents in some of the texts that we use. And so when we talk about how do we push back and how do we normalize the acceptance of same-sex parents, for example, this is how we start, but it's also from theological basis, because in the Quran, it actually mentions, it doesn't say homosexual, obviously, because that's, a Western term, but in the Quran, it talks about men who do not desire women, right? And in Islamic heritage, we actually have Sharia laws that talk about the inheritance rights of hermaphrodites, right? We are not taught that in the mosques. We are not taught that in traditional, Islamic institutions. In our Sunday schools, we're not taught that, and that's the problem. If this was being taught to children, this is our reality. This is our Islamic theology, by the way, right? The fact that Prophet Muhammad never punished anyone for being homosexual, there is no punishment for being homosexual in the Quran, then what is the problem? Why are we having such, homophobic teachings? And so that's, so our curriculum addresses these issues, and to come at it not like a chapter as a LGBT rights. That's not how we do it. We talk about human rights in general terms, and then show examples of same-sex families and so on, right? Same-sex parents and so on and so forth. So we normalize the narrative and the framing of how we teach Islam. So that's one thing we've done. And this is basically more for American or Western European parents who are progressive, who are same-sex parents, and who are just in interfaith marriages. And so it teaches an Islam that is also looking at other faiths as equals, right? And that's that's missing in your Sunday school. Name any school in America is, and not just Islam, but any religion. We talk about our religion only at the exclusion of others, and that's not what this particular Islamic curriculum does. And number two, we have to address the issues, the concerns of those parents when it comes to the textbooks, this uproar, this very vile movement that's going on. But I've seen WhatsApp videos shared with me where, the Muslim religious right has been really at the forefront of this movement in support of banning books and so on. And they've done so in partnership with the Christian right. The very same Christian right that has been promoting the Muslim ban, etc., right? So go figure. But, I've said this in my op-ed, it is very strange how when it comes to homosexuality, all the religious right, no matter what the religion is, will unite in their hate for LGBT people. So this is no exception, but I do think that what is really important of people of faith is to actually take the books, the textbooks itself, and sort of be the mediator between these two sides. I think that's a very difficult task to do when everyone's shouting down each other. But I do think that's it's a way to help demystify and to bring people along from the love and compassion, right? Like I said, it's not easy. But I think when I'm getting videos and showing the specific pictures and textbooks of what they have an issue with, and I think could be taken out of context, which probably is, right? Because they're very good at doing that. And so I think it's important to say, okay, what are your issues? Let's sit down and discuss this with an educator and how it's actually being taught in class. Because it's completely been taken out of context and how it's being taught in class. So I think this is one way of tempering that negative movement in our societies.
Yeah, I think, it's super important what you say about having a curriculum there as well, because I feel like that opens up for people who are supportive but don't necessarily like know how to talk about it, or they don't have like the theological background to explain it to others. Like having that teaching and being able to have that as a resource for then, Sunday school teachers, youth leaders and stuff to be able to then have the vocabulary to teach the children about these things, and then also then like having that teaching available, say, to parents, and just providing that education is I mean, especially in areas of America, for example, where sex education in schools, for example, is just only, or we just, we're not going to talk about it. It's like for parents only. And like, some parents are going to do the best they can within that framework and still not be able to kind of provide the information needed. And so, just having the resources out there for people to find, be able to.
Absolutely. Thank you for your responses on that. Prompting you all to start considering some questions, because I'm going to turn to you in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to end on some hope, which you all have been already elaborating already. But what do you hope? How would you define the hope for the future?
I think I find hope in just increasing, I guess, just mainstream general visibility of LGBTQ people, like people in public who feel comfortable being out and talking about themselves, or like, characters in media, for example. There's just a lot more nowadays than, when I was growing up. And like, it feels like we're going to reach a tipping point at some point where there's enough visibility out there that like it gets harder and harder to have someone grow up in a situation where they're not exposed to these ideas and to this diversity of humanity, and to be able to look at that and ask questions of themselves and explore it for themselves, even if no one else is teaching them. And so, I hope that we are reaching that point very soon.
I'm very hopeful.
Good.
So I have a 25-year-old, and that's the Gen Z generation, and their view and their worldview is incredible and inclusive and egalitarian and fierce. They're so fierce about it, and I think that. That generation and onward are the ones that's going to really bring that's going to break down in how patriarchy has, they're the ones that's going to debunk patriarchy in a major way. And, when we look at the Muslim community, for example, 52% of American Muslims support LGBTQ rights, 52. And the latest stats is that 60% of American Muslim youth support LGBTQ rights. That's the future. So I am very hopeful of the future on this issue.
Amen to that. I think that that's a beautiful response, just saying it is the younger generation, the future. I'm thinking about my 5-year-old niece who excites me, and I know that already I can see that in her, that she's looking at the world and wanting to look at it differently. So we must pay attention to our youth, must pay attention to our children as they will continue to build on in the future of a full inclusive love for the world.
And if I can say one thing about religious institutions, and I've been saying this to the mosque, but they're not going to listen to me. So, if they would just adopt a more egalitarian set of values, their mosque would be overflowing.
Amen to that. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Questions?
So I've been thinking about these problems for quite a while, and I went to the Chino School Board meeting and the Glendale School Board meeting, and the school boards there are very different. The Chino board is very, very conservative and headed up by someone who is very strongly supportive of parents' rights versus children's rights and has no concept of protecting the safety of children in environments where school disclosure of their gender expression may be harmful within their family. And Glendale's completely different from that, even though there were some people outside of the meeting, largely outside agitators, if you will, in 1960s parlance, who were very concerned about patriarchal rights and men's ability to command their family and exert authority over their wife, and if not their wife, then their children. I've been thinking maybe one of the best ways to approach this kind of multicultural education, if you will, might be to approach children at a very early age and not directly individually through the school system or through children or through teachers. That strikes me as problematic in very conservative areas. But I wonder if we shouldn't encourage a foundation like the one run by Mary Pellegrini, the Keck Foundation, to fund a new version of Sesame Street for kids at an early age when they're forming opinions about other races, other religions, gender expression, whether it's transgender or non-binary or LGBT, and try to shape the common perception of the next generations, which are improving anyway, but try to shape those younger generations of people at a very early age through bright song, emotional discussions, role-playing between these figures, because you can try to make these books and try to get them into the school system, and you can try to fight this extremely conservative trend across the entire country. But if you really want to change the culture within America and within those other countries that rebroadcast American language programs in order to help people learn English at a very early age, maybe that might be a more effective approach than this confrontational approach that we've pursued across the country. I don't know if we could buy airtime on the Christian Broadcast Network for such a show, but we could certainly air it for free on public radio, and we've got on public radio and public television, and we still have a lot of those free transmitters, UHF transmitters, out across the country. I wonder if this might not be a way of pursuing religious tolerance, cultural tolerance, racial tolerance, and gender expression tolerance.
Thank you, Sandy, for that. And I think, Sandy, to respond to that, I think what both of you have already touched on, it's that curriculum aspect of it, right? And I think what Sandy's questioning is how can we continue to expand that out and using what's at our fingertips, right? Including maybe free national airwaves, whatever that might look like, is to push, to be able to build a platform, right? For able to build that education out. Yeah.
So I haven't watched Sesame Street in a very long time, but from what I can tell, there has been some of that cultural, diversity. Also, Disney has been playing, their role as well. I mean, I think the pushback that we're getting is because it's been it's been normalized, and so the conservatives are really up in arms. I think that's the reason that we're having such a hardline pushback.
Is Sesame Street still ongoing? I get the impression that yeah.
So, yeah.
I haven't watched it in so long. Yeah, fond memories.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess as you say, like there's a movement towards like more of that inclusiveness kind of examples in education within children's TV as well. And I mean, I haven't watched very young children's TV in a long time. I don't have any kids myself, or like nieces and nephews that age or anything. But like thinking about like older children's cartoons these days, and there's a lot more, you know, queer representation and sort of like looking at these things or different kinds of families and stuff. And so that's where a lot of my hope is. But I think there is a good point in that, like, the kind of media that, you know, very conservatively religious parents will allow their children to watch. You know, that there are, for example, I mean, I talked about sort of Christian TV channels. I'm thinking back to, like, my childhood growing up on, like, the God channel, it was called in the UK, like had a lot of like American televangelism on it and all that kind of stuff, Super Kids. And like thinking, you know, the things that kind of bring us hope and kind of mainstream children's entertainment at the moment are probably not reaching those spheres, but I don't know whether, and that's a very effective sphere to try and reach into, because you know, the nature of that content is so very controlled and in terms of keeping that conservative message. So it's a bit of a bind. But yeah, I guess we can only hope that at least where you know, the channels are receptive to that kind of progressive, inclusive content, that they will continue to do that and continue to maybe also feature like queer and religious characters and voices, and showing that these are not mutually exclusive identities.
Yeah, that's great responses. Thank you. And entertain one more question. Yeah.
Hey, thanks everyone. Something came up this morning with my husband's a priest here, or one of the. And anyway, I woke up this morning and I was so angry. I couldn't even sleep last night, and I'm glad that All Saints is doing this month. My question for you all is, how do you deal with your anger around? I can say, you know, I'm gay. You know, I do get outside help around how I feel, but this morning it was really up for me. And my nephew, today says 3 years ago, my nephew died at 17. So, and he came out to me as gay, and his mom had to kind of be with that or whatever. But it's hard for me. So I'm going to ask you, how do you deal with it? And if you have it, maybe you don't. And how does your spiritual community help you with it? Because I don't hear much about anger at church at all. Well, not just true. Here I do feel people express it. But so thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, first, and blessings upon your nephew, and may his memory be a blessing to you, and sorry for that loss. That's a really good question, right? I think we all have our ways to maneuver through our anger. I can say for me, I'm not even going to attempt to, because I completely forgot who I heard this from, but I heard it once. You know, right? So we hear that Jesus says, you know, to love your neighbor and all that good stuff. And a good, actually, I heard from a preacher, and they said, in times when they're listening to the news or reading whatever on the front covers, and the anger is just starting to build in, their response is they can hear Jesus saying, love your neighbor, and then yet the response is, oh, not today, Jesus, not today. And, you know, that resonated for me because, you know, I can recall back in, you know, during the height of 2020 when we had all what was taking place on the streets and what we're witnessing, you know, day after day, from George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and just, I found myself saying, I don't think I know how to respond in a loving, compassionate way right now. And it wasn't that I didn't think it was possible, I just was at a loss. And then, so, hearing that aspect of like, I don't know, Jesus, I don't know what's going on here. We got to figure this one out. But to answer your question, at least for me, I'll have you all answer response. I find that I need to take myself away from either the news or whatever is being described and just find moments just to do some deep breathing. Sometimes go outside, just being in nature, and remind myself of the beauty that still remains in this planet, which we need to continue to save, right? But just reminding that the beauty is still around us. Sometimes it works in my favor, sometimes it doesn't. I'm like, no, back to anger, But I think it's a process, and I heard this once about the idea, at least for us in the Christian faith, in resurrection. It's a process. We don't get there overnight. Yes, we have Good Friday and Saturday, Sunday, boom, we think, okay, done, accomplished. But in reality, that whole experience as a process from death to new life. And I think that that's where I find our, at least for me, and maybe for some of us, still in that place of like, well, what does that process then look like for those who are just completely opposed to my existence, right? And I think about that straight pride flag I saw on the highway. I wasn't going to give a certain gesture. I was not going to do it, but it came to mind, and I thought, what is that doing, right, in that moment, except just more exhiberating my anger. So that's my response.
So I have a very practical solution. What I do is I do reading, or be in nature, pull out weeds, or do gardening. That's one way. Now, what I also do, what we've done with Muslims for Progressive Values, and we're going to be launching it this week. I'm really excited to be able to share this with you. But we've developed an initiative called the Purple Check Mark. And that is, we're in partnership with a mental health counselor. We are developing a process where we're going to be vetting mental health experts, counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists of Muslim heritage who are LGBT affirming. And those that have been vetted by us, we will give them a check mark, a purple check mark, which they can use beside their professional websites, their names, and then we'll list them on our website, so LGBT Muslims will know that when they go to these mental health experts, they are going to be safe. They're going to be affirming of their identity. Because there are Muslim psychologists and psychiatrists out there who are actually promoting conversion therapy. And so that's what we're doing in regards to mental health.
That's excellent. Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you for
I think
sharing.
it is.
Oh
Yes,
my
I'm
gosh, that's
super
wonderful.
excited about
Yeah,
that.
that's great.
Yeah, I don't have a response that helpful. I get angry a lot, and I know that for some, they've managed to get to a place where they're able to use their anger as a kind of galvanizing into action. But for me, usually when I'm angry, I just say things that I regret and build up a huge collection of embarrassing memories. And so I guess when I get angry, I tend to withdraw, kind of just step back and try to kind of process that, in a place where I'm not going to lash out at people to the best of my ability. But I think in those situations, it's good to be in community with others so that if you are in a place, whether out of anger or out of just exhaustion, you have to step back and remove yourself from the battle for a bit. You have other people there who are able to, pick up the work and keep going, and you're able to kind of, pass the baton so that, people can step back and take a break, because it is angering and exhausting work, and it's just never ending. And yeah, sometimes you just need to put it down and go, I need to not engage with this for a bit. I need to recover. I need to heal, and then get back to it. So yeah, having each other to be able to
Or go pray.
support each other. Yeah.
Can I jump in just for a second on
Go
this?
ahead.
Because I want to speak specifically to this. And I think the first thing you can do is you can get mad and you can get angry and you can bring that anger here. One of the things that has been one of the most effective tools in turning the church from a revolutionary force to a chaplaincy of empire has been the prohibition of anger and declaring anger to be a sin. Because what that does is, well, who are the people who are angry? They're the people who are getting pushed out.
Right.
They're the people who are on the margins, who are being told that because of who they are or how they believe or fill in the blank, that they are not worthy and they shouldn't have rights, which means the anger is against the power structure. Well, it's really convenient if you're in power to say, oh no, anger is bad. You can't feel that. Anger is a sin. Because then you trap people who are righteously angry for what is being done to them, but then told, well, no, but if you feel that anger or express that anger, that's sinful because we're supposed to love each other. Anyone who has been in a committed relationship knows that anger and loving someone are not mutually exclusive.
That's right. That's right.
And in fact, expression of anger in healthy ways is a key to being in loving relationship with each other. Jesus got pissed off. He got like turntables over pissed off. Go throughout Scripture, God gets pissed off. Anger is a natural emotion. It shows us that there is a disconnect and that something is offending our sense of justice or that we have been wounded, that there's sadness or fear there. What needs to happen is the churches need to become more and more places that can handle anger, that can talk about it, and that specifically, the more privilege we have, the greater our responsibility to hold space for the anger of people who have less privilege and nowhere to go with their anger. So that's...
Amen to that.
Amen.
Yeah, amen to that. And we can even call it in a church setting, we can call that holy anger, holy outrage, right? Because we're coming together for that. And so this should, now, beloved community, it's also meant to be a space where we can do that together and be outraged. And it's not a sin. And that's why I love that saying, not today, Jesus, because then I hear him saying, yeah, I know, not today. We're going to do something about it. All right. Thank you to Hannah and Annie for just so much for your responses and being both authentic and vulnerable with us. And I just really enjoyed our time together. To those online, once again, good to see you all. And we'll see you in just a moment at 10 a.m. service. Have a good morning.